Firstly, thank you very much, Ricardo, for coming to my show.
No, well, thank you for the invite, Si. I'm looking forward to it.
So I've gone through your profile. I can see you're working in AWS Cloud. So I thought to tell, as an advocate, so I thought to tell about you and the work that you are doing. Apart from this, also you're doing different work. So I thought to tell about your work to my audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. Yeah, so I do work for AWS as a developer advocate in developer relations. For people who aren't maybe familiar with what developer relations do or what developer advocate does, we are people who effectively talk with developers and builders, and we try and act as the voice of the customer, the voice of the developer, when we engage with our internal product teams to help make sure that their feedback is heard. So if there's any pain points, any frustrations, or anything that that the developers want to see improve, we can feed that and make sure it's put onto the product roadmap. That's kind of like a big important part of what developer advocate does. The other important part, obviously, is raise awareness of really cool things that are happening in our communities, right? So I work in open source. And so I'm, very passionate about open source. I've been working in open source for over 20 years. So one of the things that I like to do is raise awareness of all the really cool things that we're doing in open source with developers.
So you came from waterfall model to agile methodology.
So I've been working in tech for over 30 years. So I've seen everything, right? And yeah, the waterfall approach back in the day was a very dominant one. But before I joined AWS, we could see, the fact that the fact that technology was changing so rapidly, so quickly, and also this. I think what I noticed was that the business had a set of requirements, but really didn't understand the technology. The technologists understood the technology, but really didn't understand what the business wanted to do with it. And so we had a situation where the waterfall approach wasn't particularly good because there was this problem with language, right? And so what was delivered wasn't what business wanted, and what the business wanted wasn't precise enough for what the technical people needed, right? And so I think naturally what I saw is the agile approaches come in and reduce the gap so that they could actually get access to things that were being built and actually then have a more decisive role in saying, yes, this is right, this is wrong. And it's also, of course, why domain driven development now is so big and important, right? Because it fixed that problem around making sure that everyone around the table understands exactly what we're all building. I think language is a really important and sometimes under appreciated aspect of the work we do in technology.
So you're working in technology from long time. You saw the old methodology, and now you're working in the latest one. So what is the difference that you're observing?
So I think the first thing is that I would say that it's not either or. Okay, I think what's happened in at least when I've been in technology, we've developed and continue to develop new methodologies, right, to get work done. And I would say that there's no right or wrong way, okay? And there's no one way you should always do something. I think, like anything, it all depends on what your circumstances are, what skills you've got, what the, I think you have to take all these factors into consideration. And then you end up with, well, I think for this particular situation and use case, there may be, agile or Kanban might be the best way. But for another one, okay, maybe waterfall is still the best approach. Okay, so I'm not saying that waterfall is bad at all. What I'm saying is that the way we as technologists get work done consists on a continuum. Okay, different ways. They all have different advantages and disadvantages. So I think as technologists, we have to open ourselves up for that. And when we're working with our customers, understand what they're trying to do and then apply what we think is the right approach. So for some situations, agile might be the right approach. For others, maybe a more waterfall-like approach might be more appropriate. Okay, and I've worked in all sorts of, from kind of very I would say kind of old-fashioned ERP kind of systems that are very they're not very dynamic, right? So their technology doesn't change very often. There's not necessarily many features. It's more kind of like on a stable path, right? So it's more like applying security fixes or bug fixes, maintaining compatibility with existing or new software. So the actual feature is kind of like quite stable, versus the kind of like the new projects which are changing every week almost, and that requires a completely different approach, right?
So how many years of experience you have as an advocate in AWS Cloud?
So I've been here now 5 years. But I think that the path to being advocate actually began before I joined AWS. And I think for people who are maybe listening to your YouTube channel and podcast, I think instinctively whether this is something that's going to be of interest to you because of the kind of work you start doing. So I think it must have been about maybe 15, maybe even 20 years ago when I was in my previous employer, where I would do projects and I would work in technology and I get really excited by it. And I wanted to share this with other people. Now, my audience in those days was other teams within my organization, maybe the other parts of the business, but also the kind of user groups that we used to have. So back in the day, before the internet almost, in fact, they would still be technology meetups. So we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have Twitter, we didn't even have the internet, but we had meetups. So the big technology providers, they would organize, maybe quarterly meetups in their buildings. We would turn up and we would do talks. We would meet other people. We would learn, new things from those other people. And that was like very precious because, to get that information, it was really hard, right? So, these user groups were very, very well attended. And that was kind of like the first kind of like time where I realized that this is like something I really like doing. And I volunteered on many of these for technologies now that probably most of your viewers won't ever have heard of or even used. Things like CC Mail, Lotus Notes, Lavelle Networks. These are old technologies, but they were very, very big at the time, had big growing communities. And we all wanted to learn more about the topic. And so we shared what we knew. And it was great. It was fantastic. And I think now kind of like then moving forward with the internet, I kind of carried that on in various different areas. And I think open source was probably the one that really stuck because I could really see and was really passionate about open source because I thought this is a really amazing way to drive innovation. And so I kind of became a long life advocate for open source, even before I joined AWS. And so I think that if you as an individual are one of these people that, go beyond just using some technology and really think this is really cool, and maybe you write a blog post or maybe you do a short video, those are the beginning skills, I think, of an advocate. And I think you then basically have to evolve that and mature that, with some additional, sort of skills as well. But I think that's where mine started from anyway.
Is it important for an advocate to know how to communicate with computer?
So I would say yes, is my answer to that. I think advocates, first and foremost, are users of whatever technology, right? So if you're an advocate for, let's say, open source, then you have to be credible, okay, when you're talking to other people, okay? So for me, advocates tend to have that experience, okay, of actually doing something. So we call it kind of like your customer zero, okay? You're using it on a regular basis. Not just the technology, but other people who are using the technology. All the little details, all the in-jokes, all that kind of stuff. So you go down to a really, really low level. And I think for me, this is my own personal view. I think that's really important because when you then go up and write a blog post or do a video or maybe go on stage and talk about something, you have to, be credible to the audience because the audience are going to have questions, right? And I think that you've got to be in a good situation to be able to answer those questions. Now, for people who are beginning there's always those one or two technologies that they're really passionate about. So I always say focus on those things, dive deep on those, and then start, kind of evangelizing kind of those technologies. Because I think what's interesting in those ones, there's a level playing field because everyone is in the same situation. I know back in the day when we had Lotus Notes, very few people knew Lotus Notes, so it was very easy to start, even though I was only learning it for a year or so. Everyone else was in the same situation as me, so we could all go together and learn from each other. So I think some of that depends on what you're going into. What about yourself, Sai? Are you an advocate for anything in particular?
I'm a DevOps engineer.
So you're passionate about DevOps, right?
Yeah.
So you must know the feeling, right? So you're deep into, who people are, what people are doing, the community, the technologies, and people probably trust you because of that, right?
Correct. Yeah. So how is working in AWS Cloud?
Oh, fantastic. It's amazing. I absolutely love it. I joined 5 years ago. I wish I'd joined sooner because I think the organization, for me, is a really good fit because I love the strong cultural aspects of working at the company. We have a very, very good culture, which is written about the Amazon leadership principles, 16 leadership principles. And I would say probably that's what brought me to the organization because I'm very customer driven. Always have been ever since I started working in my first job in, doing washing the dishes in a restaurant. I then worked in a supermarket, on the tills and in the grocery store. And I always wanted to make sure the customers were happy, always. Right. And then when I started working in my first tech job, I always wanted to make sure the customers were happy. And I have a funny story. I think it's funny. It was very early. I think it was the first year of my career, 1993. So, Sai, you probably weren't even born then. You look like you're a young man. So, it was 1993, and I was working for a very small IT company, and we were doing a demo for a customer, a very important customer. It was late in the evening because sometimes in those days we used to do demos in the evenings when the shop had closed. We brought customers in, and it's a very small company. It was like 5 of us, and so we had the main technical guy. He was doing a demo of this piece of software called GemDraw. For people who are there, if you remember it, this is going back in the day when Gem was an operating system you ran on x86 machines, and I was working in the back office. So I was making cups of tea and coffee for the customer. I was making sure that everything was okay. I was just doing all the odd jobs that needed to be done. And at the end of the demo, the customer goes to the boss. Goes, that was the worst demo of my life. Okay, I've wasted 2 hours of my time here. And he then basically went to everyone and said, look, you don't know how to demo a piece of software. I was confused. The boss, you've wasted my time. Someone else said, you couldn't answer my questions. And he turned to me and he said, but that was probably the best cup of tea I've ever had. Thank you very much. And for me, I was very happy because that's what I call customer obsession, right? Even though everyone else was failing, I still made the customer a good cup of tea, right? And I think that's the kind of it's a very silly story, but I think I have a very strong bias to customer service and making sure the customer is number one, right? And in my previous job, I was there 24 years. That wasn't really their priority. And so obviously coming to Amazon, it's been, amazing because we put our customers right at the beginning of everything. And so even the language within the organization is all focused around the customer, which is great because it means that I feel like I'm at home. It feels like a good organization with other people who also care about customers, because there's nothing worse when you work in an organization and your priorities don't align with someone else's priorities, right? Because then you're all pulling in different directions. Whereas here, we all feel like we're all pulling towards the same direction, which is basically helping our customers.
So tell me your experience as an advocate, understanding the requirements from the clients or the customers, what they need and what they want, and
Yeah.
getting those information and coming to developers and making them to do what the customer wants and trying to match the requirements
Yeah.
with the created things. So how this experience is and what are the challenges that you face while doing this?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. So I think everyone does it differently, but the way I do it is that I kind of like look and work in all the different communities where the developers are. So I kind of meet the developers where they are. So that might be in Stack Overflow, it might be in a Slack channel for an open source community or project. It could be on a website like Dev2. I'm a big fan of Dev2. It could be on social media, it could be on Twitter, it could be on LinkedIn. And so I spend a lot of time engaging with various communities, and we look for, or I look for anyway, I look for signals. So I look for common things that I hear. So are people complaining about a problem they're seeing? Are people being frustrated by something because it's not how they expect it? And so what happens is that I take a lot of that information as inputs, right? See, I call it signals. And then from that, I try and figure out, what the real problem for this customer is, or multiple customers. Sometimes it's actually multiple customers. And so quite often what I'll do is I'll dive in, I'll maybe I'll reach out to a direct message and I'll say, look, interested in your comments, your pain points, can you tell me a bit more? And then what I do is I kind of formulate kind of like what I think the problem is. And then I use that to help shape content I create. So if you look at some of my blogs, I think last year I did about 60 blog posts, of which about maybe 10, 15 of those were specifically tailored towards collecting these frustrations that a lot of people are having and then putting a blog post to help answer that. And then I share back in those communities saying, look, I heard a bunch of you were having problems. Then, here's something that might help you. Okay. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, okay, is that taking that feedback and then bringing that internally to the engineering teams, because that's a really important role of the developer advocate, okay, is to bring, that feedback and those pain points back so that there's greater awareness within our internal teams so they can actually understand the pain points of our customers. And so then they can potentially either respond directly or then basically help use that information to drive the roadmap. And at AWS, we say 90% of our roadmap is driven by that kind of feedback. And then the third aspect, okay, is when you get feedback, sometimes the answer actually isn't actually in answering the question, but looking between the lines, because there may be some common threads that maybe people are missing. And so then addressing how we can find that and then create something that helps them. So I think that's the approach I take. So I look for a signal. Okay. I then try and refine that to a situation where I can actually put myself or create for myself a specific goal I want to achieve, like addressing this pain point. And then I create content to address that. And the content, because it's a developer audience, it tends to be code. But also blog posts, and sometimes videos as well. So that's the approach I take. And I know, I think within the developer advocate community, we all have slightly different ways of doing it. But that's the way I do it.
So is it important for you to know how to code, and also is it important for you to know how the services in Amazon Web Services works?
Yeah. So I think, so I'm not a developer in the normal sense. Okay. I create the worst code possible. Right. But so it's not important for me to be a good coder because, there's no production loads running, with my code, thankfully. Okay. But what it is important is for me to almost like light the path and show people how to do something. And to spark their imagination. So as an example, last year I did some content around one of the open source projects that I'm very passionate about, Apache Airflow. and I did a really cool demo around how to do this in a hybrid environment. Okay, so the code wasn't like, amazing, but it worked. It absolutely worked, and anyone could reproduce the code for themselves, right? But what was important, okay, was it planted a seed on how you can then use that approach to then solve real problems. And I actually had then a few people who actually attended some of the talks I did on that, who used that in their own organizations and then basically wrote about it in a much more detailed way with much better code than mine was, which is great. It's a great outcome because, first of all, we're lighting the path for them with some code to show them it works, but then helping them see that you can do better code than this. This is just really just to show you the way, right? And so what I do is I try and focus on code that works, that shows best practice. So I don't, for example, have all my permissions open. I try and restrict and scope down permissions so that it's more like for what you would do if you were taking this code. I try and do everything through infrastructure as code. I don't do ClickOps. I do everything through the command line. I try and implement code pipelines, so that people can do this themselves. So obviously, from a DevOps mindset, I try and think that, people might want to do this in a more production environment. So how would you take that and then actually put it into a pipeline, that kind of thing? So I think that you don't need to necessarily be a good coder, but you need to understand how it works for sure. And you need to be able to put together something that works consistently, reliably, and shows best practice. And then I think, from the point of view of knowing the services, there are over 200 services in AWS. There's no way that I can know all of them. So what I do, the approach I do is I take a approach of, based on the problem I'm trying to solve, what are the AWS services that make sense? And I then say, these are the services I'm going to use and why. And then I learn them as I'm doing the post, right? So that I can share my learnings with everyone. So one of the things that I think that my posts do that maybe other people don't, is mine's like a journey, right? And I have errors. I run into problems. I show error message saying, I tried to do this. I got this error message. What's wrong? And then I show how I fixed it. And that's important because, when we do things never work first time, right? And I actually think there's big value in actually sharing the error messages you get, because if you Google that error message and it's in your blog post, then someone else is going to see your blog post and it's going to help them solve the problem, right? So I'm a big believer in, don't give me the polished, beautiful thing. I want to see everything. I want to see all the workings of it. I want to see the oil spills. I want to see the crashes. I want to see everything that goes wrong, because that way I'll feel more comfortable that you've been on the journey that I want to go on, and I don't have to make mistakes you've made.
And what kind of projects you worked on as an advocate in this 5 years in AWS Cloud?
Well, I've worked in lots of different things. So I've done stuff on open source projects like Apache Airflow. I've done some really cool things on multi-architecture pipelines, helping people take open source software and compile it from x86 to Graviton. I worked on some AI stuff, AI services, and I've done some non-tech stuff as well. There's a great program called Get IT, where we try and encourage and inspire younger children from age of 11 to 12 to think about a career in tech. And I created the bootcamp material for that program. So it's very, very broad, and also I've been doing a lot of live streaming as well. So I think what I love doing is I love sharing kind of like all the variety of different open source projects that people create with other builders, right, other developers, so that they can understand and have awareness of this. It's the number one thing I think that people reason why people want to use open source is to help solve problem. But there's sometimes no awareness of these projects. And actually, I created a newsletter I think 2 years ago. I publish every Monday. So this morning I published issue number 149 of my open source newsletter. So milestone 150 edition next Monday. And this is a celebration of open source projects in general. But these open source projects tend to be focused on AWS, right? So, but they still have the same advantages, right? So with open source, you have the four freedoms: the freedom to study, to edit, to copy, and to run. Okay, so anyone who's an AWS customer can take these projects and do what they want with them, right? It's fantastic, because quite often these projects will save you a lot of effort, a lot of time. And so I've been doing that now for over 2 years, this newsletter, to raise awareness of all these amazing projects. And every week I'm amazed at more creativity, more ingenuity, and more time saving, right? Amazon leadership principle, frugality, means not just frugality of money, but also frugality of time. And so, these newsletters help, developers be frugal with time, because it helps them find these projects more quickly, and then helps them solve problems more quickly as well.
And for what industries are projects that you worked for?
So I don't work in a specific industry, actually. I work across all industries, because I think that's the nature of open source. And, open source now is everywhere. 99% of all code either uses or contains open source, so you can't escape it, right? So whether you're in financial services, in industry, or even retail, open source is everywhere. So I don't have a specific segment I focus on.
So as an advocate, you will be working for different industries.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes we are asked to call, to support industry events. I've done robotics events, for example, in the past. I've done financial services events in the past. So yeah, I mean, it's really, you do cover. I think what's interesting is if you've got a strong industry background. So I work in financial services for like 24 years. So I understand, a lot of the pain points around regulatory and compliance and risk. And so you do bring that, okay, to your perspective of when you're talking about technology. And that can be useful, because you can then talk to those developers in those industries, right, and have that shared understanding of the shared common problem space. I need to do this, but in fact, actually, it's why when I created my Airflow project last year, this hybrid one, that was rooted in the fact that I'd worked in highly regulated environments that had these really strong compliance regimes, and this was a problem that needed to be solved, right? And so that kind of content was probably more aimed towards that audience, but I wouldn't say that I just focus on air. I focus on other areas as well.
And what you don't understand about advocacy?
What do I know? So I think there's lots. Okay, so I think what I love about the role is it's still an emerging field, but I think the one thing that I battle with and still looking for good answers for is how, as an advocate, how do you measure your effectiveness, right? So we spend time writing content, we spend time live streaming, going on events, okay, but how do we know the impact to the business? Because if I work in sales, I can measure my effectiveness, right? How much I sell. Okay. If I'm an engineer, I can measure my effectiveness because how many products I release and how many bugs. But as an advocate, what's your metric? How do you measure that? And so I think that's the hardest thing that for me anyway, and something that I'm always kind of like experimenting with and playing with and trying to understand. But I think what helps me really is and whenever I do a piece of content, I set myself some very specific goals. So I want to do this. Why do I want to do this? Okay. What am I hoping to achieve? And how will I know whether I've been successful? I always start with those 3 questions. And that then helps me focus more precisely on what I'm doing. So how much time should I spend? What kind of metrics do I need to think about? And so over the years, I've developed mechanisms to help me with that. And I'm not there yet by a long way. Always looking for other ways I can measure my effectiveness and my impact. And so if there's other developer advocates out there, then please let me know. Share what works for you. But for me, one of the things that I like to do is I like to collect data from people I reach to build what I call an authentic insight from developers, because companies pay a lot of money for these reports from the likes of Gartner, IDC, Forrester. But when I've read them in the past, and I think they do a good job, but the question I have whenever I read them is who is actually, where are they getting this information from? Who's completing the surveys? Because I know I never have. I've been asked, right? I'm definitely the audience of the report I'm reading, and in the 30 plus years I've been in tech, I've never once responded to any of these surveys, right? So I'm thinking, where do they get their data? And so I've always been a little bit suspicious and cynical, I guess, of some of the reports, some of the data points. And so I try and create my own versions of those, right? Very focused and very tailored to my stakeholders. And so one of the things I think as advocates we can do is we can effectively, because we are close to developers, and we have that opportunity to engage with them and get feedback from them. Remember, feedback is a gift, so we treat it very seriously, the feedback we get from them. And if we can use that in the most powerful way to influence our internal stakeholders, then for me that's the measure of impact. So that's one thing that I've been doing, and that seems to be working quite well at the moment.
So interacting with developers and taking feedbacks very seriously and creating a product or service that is eventually required for the client or the customer. So what work you do personally in order to make it effective?
So I think personally, what I do is I make sure that I'm collecting the right data. If you're collecting the right data, that means you need to know which questions you have to ask, right? So I think that one of the things that I think one of my superpowers is knowing which questions to ask. So asking the difficult questions. And I think that's, for me, one of the things that I do and I focus on. So if I can get the right questions and then answers and data points to those questions, that provides value to the internal teams.
So listening to a lot of customers, trying to know their needs. So do you feel difficulty in understanding them and trying to solve their problem using the technology that you have?
I think I wouldn't say necessarily problem. I think you're obviously, as an individual, you're constrained by the technologies you know, right? So you will always solve the problem or solve a problem that you hear based on your experience and based on your knowledge, which will be different. So let's say, Sai, we both listen to someone, okay, and they tell us their problem, okay. You may start off saying, oh, I think you can do it this way. And that's going to be absolutely right because it's based on your experience. And I say, yeah, that's good. That's all good. But this is how I would do it. So you end up having these multiple viewpoints. And I think that's actually, if you're a developer, it's always good to get multiple viewpoints. Don't just necessarily go to me. If you hear one of my talks, hear someone else's talk as well, because they will maybe give you different, maybe competing or conflicting information. And then you can then, as an individual, understand which one you think is more appropriate for you. So I think that there is, as an individual, you have a point of view. And I think that a good advocate is highly opinionated, and will tell you what they think based on their experience. And it won't be left too much to the developer to kind of like figure out what to do, right? Because they can then still take that, that guidance, that content, they can take it or leave it, right? But they might, as long as they've learned something from it, that's the important thing.
So how is working with your development team?
So our internal developer team, so Amazon, we have this kind of this 2 pizza model. Okay, so all our teams are very small teams. So there's lots of them, and they're all different. So we have this model whereby we don't mandate that teams have to do X or Y or use technology X or Y, right? That's up to that team. They have full ownership. Again, another Amazon leadership principle, ownership. And so every team I work with is different. But what I find is that, they all want to know what developers are thinking. They all want that feedback. So we have different mechanisms by which we feed that back to them. So we create what's called friction logs. And friction logs are effectively a document we create that takes a lot of the experience and feedback we hear from developers around a specific thing, and also puts on top of that our own experience, right? So I wanted to do X, right? And let's see how I would do that using a bunch of AWS services. And then we document that and we take that back to the service team, and then we go through it with them. And they're normally brilliant. They're normally going, this is great feedback, thank you very much. And then they figure out what to do with that. So, and every team is different, right? So it is, I think that's one of the good things about being, a customer obsessed organization, is that all those teams are always wanting to have that feedback. Whereas, in my previous organization, when I was working with engineering teams, that wasn't always the case, right? So, they don't want to hear anything, right? Their product is perfect. We don't want to hear from customers, or we don't want the feedback, right? Because we know better than you, which is, I don't think that's a good situation to be in.
So being in this organization and being very focused on the customers' experiences and trying to build what they want. What kind of problems can you define some problems that you solve or that you get daily?
It varies really. I mean, there's no one problem as such. I think that if I was to say at the moment some common themes that come up, I think probably maybe the developer experience is probably a problem at the moment that keeps coming up. How do you make it easier for developers to use all these services in a streamlined way? I think that's a common problem that I hear coming up. Other than that, I think another problem that I see coming up at the moment is that within open source is, we want to use open source, but we're increasingly hearing that, it's difficult to manage the security of open source. We call it the supply chain, the open source supply chain. And so last year, we started picking up this as being a much bigger priority for developers. And that's built up all over 2022. That's been built up. We had the OpenSSF, launch a whole bunch of activities and projects to help specifically the space. But now we have to bridge the stuff they're doing with educating the developers. So at the moment, one of the big things I'm working on at the moment, content-wise, is content around how as a developer, you can take a lot of that really cool stuff that OpenSSF and others are doing and understand how to use it, why it's important, and then how to incorporate it into your build pipeline. So those are kind of two ones that currently I'm working with.
Do you know everything about advocacy? Can you do everything that comes into this role?
Can you? I mean, I wouldn't say I know everything. No. I've only been doing it for 5 years in AWS in my official capacity, right? And there are people who've been doing it far, far longer than me. We've got Jeff Barr at AWS, who's our chief evangelist. My previous boss, Ian Massingham, who's now at Avon. He's kind of like the guru for me for DevRel. There are people who you can learn from. I think what's important is as long as you're open to learning and improving. I think that's the important thing. I don't ever think that to use an agile terminology, there's no definition of done here, right? It's constant new stuff that needs to happen. New problems to be solved, new ways of trying to figure out how effective you are with the content you create, new ways of trying to measure your impact, new ways of getting information back to our internal service teams, right? And we're always iterating and experimenting with new content formats. So, with the COVID and the pandemic, video became very, very important. So, we doubled down on video. So we do live streaming, video webinars, all that kind of stuff. Community is really, really important. So, how we can improve the community experience, how we can support students, for example. Students, there are lots of students who are looking to take their first steps in the professional careers. How can we set them up for success? So we've got new initiatives like the student advocacy role within ours and cloud clubs. So people are interested. We've got this new kind of group that focuses just on students, which is great. They've got a web page which I can share with you, so you can maybe put it on the video when you put it up. And we're really looking to help students really understand about cloud and kind of get their first steps into understanding how they can use it, how they can learn it, and then how they can take that with them as they take their first jobs into the job market.
And what is your observation about my work? Have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
Yeah. So I must admit, I didn't spend a lot of time. And it's great that you've spent a lot of time kind of speaking to lots of people, including Jeff. You spoke to Jeff as well, which is great. And I think it's great. I think the question I have for you, though, you've spoken to so many people. Okay, what have you learnt from speaking to all these people? What are the top 2 or 3 things you think that you've learnt from speaking to all the people? Because you speak to so many great people you've spoken to, and I can't name them all, but I mean, it's like a rock star list of people you managed to get. So congratulations. I mean, that's no easy thing, right? To do what you do and to keep it going. So that's great. I mean, the fact you're doing it consistently is a really important thing within advocacy. Don't just do 1 or 2 videos and stop. You've kept it going, right? You've got hundreds of videos. So what have you learned then, Sai?
Yeah, definitely and also I'm the top 30. My podcast is top 30 in India, and
Wow.
the one and only podcast in India,
Fantastic.
which is selected as in the
awesome.
November season.
That's really good. That's really good. I think what I'm trying to do at the moment is I'm trying to focus a lot of my content in the India, Asia kind of sphere. The reason being is that the Americas are served very well with content. So I live stream every other Friday. In fact, actually on the 31st of March, I have an open source project called Bagisto. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. They're one of the biggest headless e-commerce projects based in India. And we've got the founder and one of the architects coming on the show to talk about it. So we try and kind of create content for that area, right? Because there's so many cool open source things happening in India and Asia and Australia that we wanted to make sure that our kind of content aligned to that time zone.
And giving answer to your question, so what did I learn?
Yeah.
So I can't explain it in like a single word or a single sentence, or there's a big thing I'll write in a book or I'll write in book or I'll write in a blog post. I don't think I can able to explain everything that I have learned, but obviously the common thing is one thing that made me to do this project is computer networks was my subject when I was preparing for PhD entrance. Once I completed my master's in software engineering, then I decided to do PhD. Then this subject, computer networks, like computers are interconnected with each other, servers are connected with each other, and information sharing, information transfer between different data centers. And this communication is happening. So I want to know reason, the creator of these data centers and this communication system who is created by human beings. So why can't I create a human network and communicate with everyone? And let's see whether how computer is communicating with all other computers. Let's see, why can't I become a computer and connect with all the computers called human beings from everywhere on this planet? And I did it. More than 100 plus country people came, and more than 560 interviews I did. Still, hundreds of interviews are still on my calendar. So what I said to this planet is, a person from one part of the world can able to connect and communicate and can establish connection between human beings and can share information and can able to put content or can able to present work with which he can connect with everyone. The common thing is everyone wants positivity, positive energy. Everyone wants other person to be happy.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that the fact you've spoken to so many people, right? the knowledge you've got in your head is very, very unique. It gives you a strong advantage, right? Because, all these people, telling you stories, you're asking all these questions, you probably have more insights than most people on the planet, because you are, like you said, you become a human network.
Yeah, definitely. Some things that people came from one part of the world, they don't know what is happening, what other human beings from other part of the planet can able to say or talk. So when I'm putting it out, they are knowing, but there are so many things that I have communicated with them. I have to put in an organization. If I work in an organization in coming days, they will know the wonders that I'm going to do with all the information that I got, including Jeff and you today.
Yeah, it's great. And actually, I totally agree with that, because I've been lucky enough to work all over the world, and people's outlooks and experiences and views in technology are different, wherever you are in the world. So being able to do that, see how things are being done in other parts is hugely valuable, right? So hats off to you. It's excellent effort.
And one observation, because you are very much into customer experience and developer experience, you understand, you take very seriously the feedbacks. So you are the person perfectly can understand my work, because something is working for me. That's why the reason I'm able to make things happen and create this network, right? So the communication is happening. So I did masters in software engineering, also bachelors in computer science and engineering. Right now I'm getting trained as AWS Cloud DevOps Engineer role. So,
Cool.
and talking with experts like you who are already in the industry, in advocacy, in architect, or as a company owners, or startup owners, or developers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, not only technical, non-technical people also I'm communicating. So collecting all this information, how this project experience that I'm going to use in my work in coming days, how this is going to be useful.
So I think I touched upon it before. There's this big interest in domain-driven architecture, right, and development. And for those that I'm not sure how familiar you are with domain-driven development, but basically it has this fundamental principle where developers don't create work for the sake of creating work. Developers create work because they're working a business, and the business needs stuff to get done, right? And the challenges in the past, when you look at failed IT projects, which there are many, okay, we all know, thinking back in the 30 plus years, the projects that have worked well, and the projects that have not worked well. And I will put my hand up. I'd say probably more projects have been not well executed versus the ones that have been well executed. The difference for me, in my own experience, which is borne out with domain-driven development, is the fact that where you've got good relationships with the business, there's this understanding of the actual and buy-in from the business in the technology side of things, then you're able to build something that's truly awesome. And I think that's the thing, is that but you have to bridge that the business side, right? It's no good just being a techie for the sake of being a techie. It's great, be the best you can in your discipline, absolutely. But unless you are able to communicate with someone on how to apply that, then it's pretty redundant, okay? It's pretty useless, because you'll end up building something that no one will ever appreciate. And I remember once when my previous company, we built the very first internet infrastructure, and it was beautiful. It was fantastic, but we did it in isolation. We were just told, build the IT infrastructure, the web hosting infrastructure. We spent a lot of money. It was all built on Sun Solaris hardware, Solaris operating system, Sun Spark hardware. It was pretty resilient over 2 sites. It was basically fantastic. It was we had zero downtime for like 3 years. Okay. And then we had someone very important in the business who I was presenting to. And he said, you know what? This is great. You've given me a Rolls Royce, but I only wanted a Volvo. Okay. And I think that was a very good reminder that, we can, as technologists, we can build brilliant things, but if it's not aligned to what the business wants, then they don't care. They really don't care. and that you've got to really focus on the business side of things, right?
So that's a great point that you mentioned. I'm sure a lot of people will take this seriously and learn what to do and what not to do. And at last, can you share your work with my audience so that they can see your work and can follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a newsletter that I do that I publish every week on Dev2. I'll share it with you so that you can put it on the website. And I have a GitHub repository where all my code goes in, so you can check it out there. There's lots of great DevOps stuff in there, lots of great build pipelines that people can use. I tend to use a combination of the AWS code pipeline tools and services. I sometimes use GitHub Actions, not so often though, but mainly open source stuff as well. So yeah, I'll share that with you. You can share that on the video link. And if anyone has got any open source projects they want me to feature in my newsletter, please reach out to me. Or if you want to appear on my open source show, then please reach out to me. I'd love to feature your open source project with our audience.
So can you spell it to my podcast listeners?
Shall I put it in the chat? Will it be in the chat? So let's have a look. Okay, let's have a look. Right, let me get the link here. So this is the so the chat. I'm not sure if you can share that on the screen, but also I have. Let's have a look. Actually, can I share my screen?
Yeah, I got it.
You got it.
Yeah.
And then I also have my personal blog, which has a version of that as well. So there's two blogs that you can share with everyone, and it's got links to all my source code. Actually, let me share my GitHub repository as well, because I can. So and there we go, and that's my GitHub repository. So there's lots of code, lots of demos of some of the stuff I've talked about today.
So can you spell your blog to my podcast listeners? Can you spell it, the domain?
Yeah, so it's blog.beachgeek.co.uk. So blog BEACHGEEK.co.uk.
So all links are integrated to that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You'll find everything on